My name is Skip Rutherford. I'm Dean of the Clinton School, and welcome to this afternoon's program. Nikolai DePippa coordinates our programs here, and he does a masterful job. And this is another one of his great programs. The idea came about, actually, when we were having a political animals club panel that Rex put on to discuss what happened in the elections. And we were sitting around the table, and it was Rex and John Brummett and Max Brantley and Doyle Webb and 3 or 4 others and myself, and not a one of us could explain Amendment 3. And so we decided collectively, at least Rex and I did, that we would have a joint program on this subject. I want you to know, in the spirit of Amendment 3, that at every Clinton School program, we buy box lunches for our participants in advance so we can have a conversation to prepare for the program. Today, Senator Woods paid for his own lunch. And Representative Sabin is fasting. Welcome to the new world of Amendment 3. Would you please welcome my good friend and the leader of the Political Animals Club, the president of the Arkansas Independent Colleges, and the voice of the Ouachita Tigers, Rex Nelson.
Why don't our panelists come on out and get a seat while I'm talking, and then I will introduce everybody. I think we're all among friends in here. I recognize about every face in the house, and I think we're all trying to figure out the same thing, and that is just what does this mean? I'm not sure by 1 o'clock we will have settled anything, but at least we're in a room where nobody's trying to buy anything. So we've had our water, you know, the water. How much that water cost, Skip? We may have to, Warwick's getting it out of the way. We may have to talk about that. Yeah, okay, I took a lunch too. I work for the private schools. We can do what we want. Thank goodness for private education. No FOI, you know, it's a great world. But I do appreciate Skip joining with the Political Animals Club. I know many of you are regulars at our Political Animals Club, and we'll be cranking up our 2015 program. In the interest of time and because it is so crowded, Skip mentioned the political animals tradition of elected officials introducing themselves. We will not do that, but would all elected officials, we're crowded, I want him to ask you to stand. Please raise your hand, and we got a lot in the crowd. Let's give them a hand. Now, Warwick, I'm going to do something I usually don't do at Political Animals also to show you the interest. If you are a registered lobbyist, would you raise your hand? Look at there, almost as much as the elected officials. All right, we are proud to have, John's taking pictures over there. He may be tweeting already. We are proud to have this panel. I'm going to pretty much get out of the way and let them talk. State Senator John Woods, he is a Republican from Springdale. Welcome. Sitting to his left, amazingly, is State Representative Warwick Sabin. He is a Democrat from Little Rock. Also in the middle, we have Little Rock attorney and longtime expert on ethics reform. In fact, Warwick was telling a story about getting a long memo and saying, now who is this Scott Trotter? It shows how young Warwick is. I mean, I have been quoting Scott Trotter for more than 30 years now. We're both getting old, but welcome Scott Trotter here. And from the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce, Randy Zook. I thought I would start with you, Warwick, and John, I'd let you work in, but a little bit of a history lesson of how this came about as ethics reform, and then how we got salaries worked into it, and how we eventually got term limits worked into it.
Sure, we're glad to do it. And thank you for this opportunity, and really appreciate the interest in Issue 3. So I hope we're able to clarify and bring some illumination to what we just passed here in the state of Arkansas. But as with most things like this, there's a very, very long story to this. I'll try to keep it very, very brief and to the point. This story basically begins in 2012 when Regnant Populace, the citizens group, tried to put an initiative on the ballot that really addressed three different ethics reforms. The first was to ban all gifts from lobbyists to elected officials. The second was to ban all corporate contributions to political campaigns. And the third was to increase the cooling off period from being a legislator to becoming a lobbyist from 1 year to 2 years. And so I think, as all of you know, unfortunately, Regnant Populace was not able to get enough signatures to get that onto the ballot in 2012. But that was the year that I was running for office, and I was a big supporter of that initiative. And so when I came into the legislature in 2013, I introduced three bills, HB 1923, 1924, and 1925, that represented those three ethics reforms. And those bills did not get a lot of traction in the legislature. And so later on in the session, I bundled them together into a constitutional amendment proposal. And not too long after that, I was approached by my friend John Woods. We went to college together. He represents Springdale in the Senate. We come from two different political parties, but he said that he had seen my ethics amendment, and he had another ethics provision that he wanted to add to it, and it had to do with establishing a salary commission, an independent citizens commission to set the salaries of elected officials. He'd seen that work in 8 or 9 other states, and it seemed to be working really well, and would I consider adding it to my amendment? And quite frankly, not only did he convince me of the merits of the idea, but I thought it would be a good way to try to move the ethics reforms forward in a very challenging political environment. And so we added that to the amendment. And then not too long after that, the two of us were approached with the idea of this term limits modification, so to speak, where the cumulative term limits that existed at the time would be preserved, and that's 16 years cumulative between the House and the Senate, but would be basically loosened up so that those years could be spent in whatever way an elected official could get himself or herself elected. So either all 16 in one chamber or the other, or divided in any way they could get themselves elected. And so we felt like that was necessary to move the amendment forward, and sure enough, that ended up becoming the sort of gumbo that got the amendment through the legislature. But there's a very long story and more details to that, but I'll stop there and let Senator Woods.
John, talk a little bit about how you decided the ethics amendment would be a vehicle to carry these other issues.
Right. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge, is David Couch here? David, are you here? Where are you at? Is David here? No show? Okay. Well, I wanted to give props to David Couch and Paul Spencer of Regnant Populace, those two. Without those two, we wouldn't be here today. It's very interesting. Warwick and I went to college together. He was president of the U of A, and I was an off-campus senator. And I thought, when he got elected, I thought, that's cool. That's cool. I hope that one day we can run a bill together. How neat would that be? And lo and behold, here we are today. And I think big things happen when two parties put partisan politics aside and work together. And this is what a big example of two parties coming together can do. And Warwick, I'm proud to work with you, man. It's cool. And so the Salary Commission is something I've been kicking around for a while. And I just saw a lot. You just see a lot when you're down here. And there's some things I thought weren't right. And I thought a lot of lawmakers were put in bad situations. I saw some marriages fail. I saw some lawmakers destroy their credit. I've seen bad behavior, and we've all read about some of that in the paper. And I thought, how much of that is just because we just kicked the can so far down the road, we just won't really look in the mirror and just call it for what it is? And who's going to be the people who are going to stand up and fix this? And that's what we had to do, and it's tough. And we've been, had a lot of criticism, but I'm convinced that the Salary Commission is a great idea, and it's something that's needed to be done. And I got the idea from Oregon. Oregon passed the law in 1983, and they said the legislature in Oregon is meeting too much. Lawmakers are sacrificing a lot. It's putting a lot of pressure and stress on their home family life. We've got to address this. So they met, and they corrected the salaries, and then they moved on. They didn't meet again for 25 years. The next time they met was in 2008. They met for 30 days, got in and out, and they were done. And that's why when we wrote it, Warwick and I wrote in the bill that the Salary Commission is going to meet here soon, and they're going to be in and out in about 60 days, about double the time that Oregon met in 2008. They met for about later part of September and October, they were done. So that's pretty much why I was passionate about the Salary Commission. The term limit bill, I saw some things that I didn't like. And if I had not served in the House, we probably wouldn't have had the term limit aspect in the bill. But the House is at a complete total disadvantage with the bureaucrats, with the lobbyists, with the Senate and the governor, and it's not fair. In my original idea, all I wanted to do was add one more 2-year term to the House. That's it. That was it. 8 and 8. You can do 8 in the House, 8 in the Senate. That's it. 16 total. That was my original idea. We didn't have the support. A lot of House members and senators said, taking away gifts and meals and cooling off and corporate campaign contributions and the Salary Commission. I don't know, man. And I just said, well, what do you want? Well, what about if we make it to where you could do 16 all on one side? That was not my idea. That was brought to me by quite a few other lawmakers. And Warwick and I talked about it. It wasn't our original idea, but we compromised, and that was the end result. But all we really want to do, or all I want to do, is just add a 2-year term to the House. That's it. Make it 8 and 8. And so at the end of the day, we decided to do 16 total. You can do it which way you want. We were originally tied with Michigan and California for the 3 strictest states in the union with the strictest term limits. There's only 15 states that have term limits, and we're still one of them. We were tied in the top 3. California said, this is terrible. Now, they didn't like the 6 and 8 formula. Now they're 12. You can mix it up in California. It's the same as Oklahoma. You can mix it up, do 12 in Oklahoma. So Oklahoma and California are identical. And so we're 16. I think it's fair. And that's pretty much how we got to where we're at. Just to explain to everybody.
Warwick, in kind of the way of bringing Scott in, quickly tell that little story about the memo and how detailed it was that I opened with.
Well, sure. So the story I told them in the back is that, obviously when we got the amendment finally assembled and we're moving it through the legislature, this was kind of getting near the end of the session, and as most of the people in this room know, that's a frenetic time. The nights get long and everybody's tempers are pretty hot. And so, I had passed the amendment through the Joint State Agencies Committee, which is no small task because the legislature can only refer 3 constitutional amendments every 2 years. And there's a lot of jockeying for who gets to get their pet project through the legislature as a constitutional amendment, which is part of another reason that kind of drove combining different issues into this one measure. But passed it through joint state agencies. And if memory serves, I think I'd actually already passed it on the floor of the House, and all that was left was for Senator Woods to pass it over in the Senate. And at about 7 o'clock at night, I come back to my desk on the floor of the House, and there's this envelope sitting on the desk, and I open it up, and there's this thick memo by some guy named Scott Trotter that I'd never heard of, and it was basically picking apart all the ethics provisions that were in the bill, and there were very technical notes, I would say. I mean, he's an attorney, I'm not, but I read through it and I go, geez, these are some really, serious issues that we need to address. And so I immediately called him that night and from the floor of the House, talked to him, talked to Senator Woods. We got a meeting together on a Saturday morning at 10 over at the Capitol, and we went through everything, and our guy over at the Bureau of Legislative Research, Matthew Miller, agreed with Scott's technical comments. And we all kind of agreed at the time that we were going to pull the bill down and amend it so that we, would close whatever loopholes that Scott had identified that would allow people, to basically avoid some of the ethical reforms that we were trying to put forth. And everyone thought we were insane to do that because we'd already passed it through the committee and through the House. There was a lot of tension going on. As you know, people were trying to pass tort reform and other things. And tempers were even hotter, a week later. And sure enough, we amended the bill, put everything in there Scott had suggested. We brought it back into committee. It failed. I think we brought it back again. I think it failed again. And then we tried the third time after that. We actually finally got it through the committee. I really don't even know how. And then I passed it on the floor of the House, and then John passed on the floor of the Senate. But I mean, it was quite an ordeal. But we tell that story because it's important for everybody to understand how committed we were to the ethics reforms. I mean, that's what I got into this for. That's what the bills were about originally, and that's what this constitutional amendment was designed to do. And so I'm really glad because we got to know Mr. Trotter, and he's a very good guy.
Scott, as we were visiting before the meeting, I think it would be fair to say that the majority of the people in this room probably didn't think this would pass. I did not think it would pass due to the term limits increases. You said you did because of the history of ethics legislation in Arkansas. Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Well, I was surprised, but I thought it had a chance. And there was no campaign in favor of it except some small efforts like that John Woods made up in Northwest. And he had a fact sheet that he handed out everywhere he went, and some efforts that Warwick Saban made. I wasn't involved in any way in promoting it or writing letters to the editor or otherwise. But there is a history in the state of the voters approving ethics reform. And they've done it at least 3 times that I was involved with in the past. And one of them was when we brought lobbyist disclosure and public official financial disclosure to the ballot for the first time. Another one was campaign finance reform and the actual creation of the Arkansas Ethics Commission, which again was done by public initiative and voted on. The third one was what became Amendment 70 to the Constitution, which very straightforward way, it increased salaries for our executive officers as well as for legislators. And it had some ethics reform in it, in that it did away with sort of the funny funds that had been used to supplement salaries called public relations funds, and it instilled some accountability with regard to expense reimbursement. And it passed too, even though it was salary increases for those nasty politicians, you know. And so there is a history, and I do think that when you think about the ballot title on this proposal, if you assume that some people vote in part by looking at the ballot title when they cast their vote, the ethics provisions were up front in the ballot title. And so I think that, you know, that could explain largely the margin of victory. Yeah.
The morning after the election, I had to make an early morning appearance on Channel 4, which, as you know, studios is right across from the Capitol now. And after I had finished that appearance, I decided, all right, I'm going to go over to the state capitol early morning crowd and just see what the reaction is. So I wandered down to the cafeteria. Many insiders in this room, as you know, a lot of state business has been done at the round table through the years in the state capitol cafeteria. The good news was that Don Allen was in his regular seat, so the world had not ended the night before. If Don had not been there, I would have worried at that type of morning. Clark Hall, I think you were there that morning too. But there was a lot of confusion. Randy, you call a meeting right after the election, and you could barely get people in the room. There was so much interest, and I guess the best term would be mass confusion, would it not, coming out of that? Exactly what does this mean to us now?
Yeah, not only did we have the room full, but we had almost 70 people on the phone from around the state who had dialed in. I think, you know, it was and I think still is, a situation that's pretty cloudy. I guess I'm here as the token representative from the dark side this morning. You know, I confess I am a registered lobbyist. So,
that's good for the soul to go on and say that.
Thank goodness lobbying is still not a 4-letter word, although it probably is in a lot of circles. I think there still remain a number of questions, very serious questions, kidding aside. The fact is, most of us in the lobbying community have seen an enormous lifting of pressure as a result of this, and lots of lobbying and government affairs budgets have improved dramatically as a result of this legislation. It ain't going to cost as much from a lot of different perspectives. Now, there are serious questions, though. I think we could subtitle this amendment yet another Lawyers Relief Act, because there are going to be a lot of court cases to clear up a lot of issues. The most pressing one that I get in conversations, I've had at least 10 really good, top-notch lawyers here in Little Rock tell me that the 16-year clock starts anew for everybody. And I know Warwick and others will shake their heads, but that's what court cases are all about. That's why we go to court, when lawyers disagree. And my guess is we need a declaratory judgment from the state Supreme Court that clarifies that issue and removes the question from the table. Because what I'm suggesting is a lot of people, a lot of good lawyers, I am not one of them, I simply am quoting them, say that the clock starts over for everybody who's in the legislature today and everybody who's served before. Now, some of you might relish Mike Beebe getting back to the Senate. You know, he might have another 60. It might be something he could finally find, you know, that he could do once he hangs it up. But I just put that issue forward because it's a question I know that's on many minds. I do not propose an answer to it. I don't have a clue. It needs to be resolved, though. And, you know, there will be clarifying legislation to clean up some of the details around this. But I think long term, we may well see some unintended consequences from this in terms of the salary commission rather than an accountable legislature voting on pay raises. We may see ourselves moving closer and closer to a full-time legislature. I'm not sure in a state the size of Metro St. Louis that would be wisdom. Down the line. There's no question that legislators need more money. There's no question that people make enormous sacrifices to come down here and service. And it is costly. There's no question about that. And our term limits were ridiculous. And we at the State Chamber were in favor of at least some change and improvement to remove some of the restrictions. But, you know, that wasn't what got on the ballot. But here we are, and here's this new set of rules. I will tell you this, almost every lobbyist I know welcomes clarity on all of these issues. This is not this is kidding aside. This is an issue that lobbyists perform a very positive, helpful function in our government. Without lobbyists, we would not see lots of good, solid legislation passed. We would fail to pass, or we would pass instead, bills that were not as informed from a particular industry or a particular sector of the state. The perspective that lobbyists bring to lots of these bills is invaluable. I think most legislators would acknowledge that. So lobbyists as a group welcome this. We just want to know the rules because we don't want to get the members in trouble. And that was the reason for the concern a couple of days after, because there were already events scheduled. Several of them got canceled as a result because the new rules prohibited what was proposed or what was planned. So we just want clarity. We want to know what the rules are, and we hope that we can get some of the clarifying legislation passed as soon as possible in the session.
Central Woods.
Now, I respect Mr. Zook and his comments, and I've been contacted by quite a few people with questions as well. But I've spoken with the Bureau about the 16 years, and they've made it very clear to me that they're ready to stand up and say that the original intent is absolutely that you can do no more than 16 combined, and that the differing attorneys' opinions to them doesn't make sense, and that they're sticking to how they wrote the bill, and this is how they interpret the bill, and they're confident that it is only 16 years total, and it's not a starting anew. You know, we didn't go in and scratch the existing code of term limits. We amended the existing term limit, so it's an amendment to the existing code. So I'm pretty confident to go ahead and say that it's just 16 years total, and it's not going to be a scratch start off anew. So I just want to clear that up. Bureau has made it clear to me that that's the way that they wrote it and intended. But of course, I know that
Whether it's this issue or others, I mean, there's so much here. Do you believe there are issues, though, as Randy said, that eventually will have to be interpreted by the Arkansas Supreme Court?
I don't think so. I think that, well, you never know, but the Ethics Commission is gonna answer a lot of our questions. It's the first bill Warwick and I plan to run. So Warwick, if you want to dive in.
Yeah, I mean, I'll address sort of the concerns about the ethics provisions. I mean, I think, any concerns that are coming to us right now, we're taking very seriously. I mean, we've conducted a lot of meetings and we've received inquiries, and anytime there's a question, we want to make sure people know that we're taking it seriously and we're going to investigate the question. And obviously, this is a tremendous change of culture, which I think is a good thing. It's the whole reason why I introduced the amendment in the first place, really, was to change the culture of how we do business at the state capitol and try to improve it. And what we've done is adopt, some best practices that exist in places like Washington, D.C. and other places. And I think once people get used to this, it's only been a month since the amendment passed. We haven't had a chance to be in session yet to issue some clarifications. The Ethics Commission, they're at the staff level, refuses basically at this point to answer any questions about it until we give them the authority to do so, which is why we have to, the first bill pre-filed for the 2015 session is one that Senator Woods and I pre-filed. It's a shell bill now, but it's basically going to give the Ethics Commission at least that staff advisory authority until the Ethics Commission itself can approve some rules that enact the provisions of the Ethics Amendment. But I think the point is, the amendment was written pretty clearly, and it was written in such a way that reasonable actions by lobbyists, because we absolutely agree that lobbying is protected under the U.S. Constitution. It's a First Amendment right. It's a noble profession, and will always continue to be that. Well, but no, it is.
Just because it's getting near Christmas, no need to get carried away.
Citizens of the United States need to have the opportunity to solicit and advocate for their interests in front of their elected officials, and that's what lobbying is, and it's a good thing. What we're trying to eliminate is the quid pro quo that sometimes exists in these situations. And so that's why, for instance, you can invite the entire legislature or an entire committee to an event that involves food and drink, because you really can't argue that there's much of a quid pro quo when an entire body is invited to something like that. I mean, you could argue that, but we're trying to be reasonable here. What I would put the question forward is, to what extent are we inhibiting lobbying by preventing, those kinds of one-on-one dinners and drinks and lunches and everything else? Now, it makes the lobbyist job a little bit harder. I acknowledge that, because it's more convenient, obviously, to have that time in between meetings and everything over a meal to talk about an issue. That makes perfect sense to me. The problem is that once people start buying you things, they start expecting things in return often, or at least there's that impression that could be made. And I think what we're trying to do for the citizens of Arkansas is eliminate not just impropriety, but the appearance of impropriety, so that no one will question how these decisions are made. And so I think everything that we can do to address those situations when it comes to lobbying, and those situations, quite frankly, when it comes to contributions to political campaigns, we need to do that in order to restore confidence and integrity to our political system. And that's at the state and national level. And there are things that we can't do at the state level right now because of the decisions that have come down from the United States Supreme Court. But I think these are the efforts we need to continue to make.
Scott, in your analysis of what the voters passed, are there areas that you think are so lacking in clarity that it might require litigation? Or is everything fairly clear to your eye as you look through what we passed?
I can give you my forecast of things to come. First of all, I think there's a pretty good chance that U.S. term limits would want to come back to the state and do a public initiative campaign to try to undo this extension of term limits. Secondly, I wouldn't be surprised if a lawsuit was filed to challenge the campaign contribution limits that bar contributions from corporations, labor unions, and other types of associations that the Democrat Gazette article a few days ago indicated were a pretty substantial source of contributions, say, in the governor's race this past time around. And there is some Supreme Court precedent, including a case that arose out of Montana, that certainly would give some arguments to be made by opponents with respect to the ban on corporate and union contributions. And I'm not forecasting that it would be a successful lawsuit, but I wouldn't be surprised if one was filed. And then I do think that we need to have a shakedown period, just like we did when lobbyist disclosure was first approved by voters, where the Ethics Commission will have to issue opinions and do some rulemakings to further clarify. But I would like to emphasize that most of the definitions that are in this proposal were time-honored definitions that the Ethics Commission is accustomed to interpreting. And they were lifted out of various statutory provisions and emulated in this proposal. So it's not like a brand new drafting of key types of definitions. The other thing is the Salary Commission. And you know, I've sort of come out of retirement from being a good government advocate, which I retired from in 1999, if you can believe that. But I'm going to try to see it through in the sense of spending a little extra time as a volunteer to do anything I can do to be helpful to the Salary Commission, because I do think that it's very important that it get off to a good start. You realize it's going to be setting salaries for all the judges in the state, trial judges, appeal court judges, as well as legislators, as well as the executive branch elected officials. And that's a big, big deal. And one thing I guess I'm most proud of as far as some of the contribution I made in the late drafting of the proposal, I didn't come up with the ideas to be included in the proposal. I just tried to improve upon it with some technical drafting. But we did put in there some provisions to ensure that the Salary Commission would operate in the open. We made sure that Freedom of Information Act applies. We said that the Salary Commission has to make proposals and put them out for public comment and allow the public an opportunity to comment before they adopt the salaries. And they have to reveal any source of data that the Salary Commission relied upon in making their proposals. And so I'm hopeful that we can get to better salaries in a reasonable way where the public will feel that they got to have proper input, and it'll move the state forward and improve our salary structure for all those officials. And I do have with me today something that I sent to the Salary Commission that's not in any way recommending the salaries to be adopted, but just setting out in outline form, I think, all the various things that they might want to look at before they make their decision about salaries. And I've got a few extra copies if anyone would like to see those.
All right, thanks, Scott. Let's open it up to your questions now.
I'd like to know what the panel thinks about the possibility that the money lobbyists would have traditionally spent on individual meals and the like might instead be shifted to donations to political action committees that will then send the money to the politicians, campaigns, et cetera, instead.
Who wants to start?
Well, I mean, I'll
Jump in.
quickly just say,
Representative
so donations from political action committees are allowed, and I think we absolutely anticipate that, you know, that money that came from corporations previously would probably, at least to some degree, end up coming to campaigns through political action committees. Political action committees, however, you know, do require a certain degree of a burden of registration, a certain degree of reporting. I think political action committees also mitigate to some degree some of the practices that we saw in the last campaign cycle and in previous campaign cycles where you know, one person or one interest could direct a lot of money at once to one particular candidate through multiple corporations that he or she may control. And I think that's a lot harder to do with political action committees. And so I think the the answer is, for as much heat as I've taken from the side that didn't want to see any of this pass at all, I've also taken heat from the side that says you didn't go far enough. But I think when you're dealing with these issues, you obviously can't do everything all at once. This was a very big bite at the apple. And I know that there is, interest not just in Arkansas, but around the country for further campaign finance reform, and that can be addressed. But in the meantime, Political Action Committee contributions, of course, will still be protected under this law.
Senator Woods, do you want to add to that?
Warwick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard a pretty high number of what was spent on food last session 2 years ago. I'm just going to throw this out there. I need to verify this. I hate to say something and retract it, but it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on food, last session for lawmakers in Arkansas. And I'm going to go ahead and lowball it quite a bit. So it's just part of the new system. It's just the way it is. I've met so many legislators, over the last few years that have said, man, in Arkansas, lobbyists can buy y'all gifts, buy y'all meals. Wow. And now that this has gone into effect, we're like a lot of other states are. And I think in time, this will just settle in and it'll just be the way it is. And I'll go ahead and take more questions.
All right, Randy or Scott, did y'all want to add to that? Randy?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in, just to comment on that. I think that's a likely outcome. I think there will be some shifting. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. The plain truth is it's tough to raise money for a PAC. Let's say you're ABC Corporation. The company can't put money into that PAC. It's got to go up and down the halls of the business and get the money out of individuals. And that is not a lay down hand. Talk to anybody. We operate a PAC, and it's like pulling blood out of a turnip. It's hard to get people to cough up money on their own because it can't be company money. So it's going to be tougher for candidates to raise adequate money for their campaigns, I think. But we'll get used to the new level.
What is the status of the comfortable travel junkets under this amendment?
Travel.
Well, I think it's junkets.
Yeah, junkets.
Well, I can respond to that. There are some exceptions to the gift ban, and keep in mind the gift ban only applies to lobbyists and those who employ lobbyists. It doesn't apply to non-lobbyists. There's still gift reporting out there, existing rules that apply to non-lobbyists under the old law. But one of the exceptions is one that's been around with respect to lobbyist disclosure for a long time, and that is that if a national or regional organization is like having a conference and it invites a legislator to come to that conference, and the legislator is coming to appear in his or her official capacity, then the national or regional organization can pay for the travel cost for that public official. It doesn't mention lodging and food, however, it just mentions the travel cost. So that's one exception to the gift ban, meaning that would be permissible. However, if it's like just an interest group that wants to take a legislator on a hunting trip and pay for the travel and food and lodging and hunting fees or whatever, then that would be a barred type of gift.
I'd like for Mr. Trotter to respond first, and then I'd like for you, Saban, to. When I looked at this before we voted on it, there were 3 issues that I thought that was presented to we the people. One was because of our salaries for elected officials and for our constitutional officers, that we were trying to find a living wage so that we would get the quality that's necessary for us to have quality legislative information. The second part of the question is, if that was true, if that hypothesis was true, that we needed to pay for the quality of legislative matters we would have in this state, then now that we are where we are, will we have people running for office without having quality wages? That was an assumption that we didn't have it. So how is this going to impact the quality and the time it takes to be a qualitative legislator or constitutional officer. And I'd like for him, because I've seen you
Scott.
before, I was great.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that if the salary levels are reasonably bumped up for legislators, that it will enable some people to run and serve as a legislator who would have felt that they would have had a very difficult time doing that. Because, obviously someone who is well-heeled would not necessarily worry about the salary that they get as a legislator. And maybe they are a business owner who can take time away because they have other employees who are running their business. But another impact, I think, would be if you improve salaries for legislators, it would enable more of them to spend more bona fide time on what I would consider to be constituent services, to where they would not be just so strapped for funds where they've just got to work every minute and they can't go help a constituent or they can't go attend a meeting at night because it's detracting from their own ability to make a living. And one thing I suggested to the Salary Commission is that perhaps they do a survey of all members of the legislature who have been there previously, and they could respond anonymously if they wanted to, but just talk about the amount of time that they spend when they're not at the legislature, not during a session. And they get, I've experienced it with them, they get called upon all the time back in their districts to go and attend things and help constituents. And that's time spent that I think is part of the job. And there ought to be some way for the Salary Commission to take that into account with respect to setting the new salaries, and not just think of it, oh, it's just purely part-time and every now and then they attend a legislative session. Warren.
Quick comment.
Yeah, Randy.
It's going to be an interesting dynamic. The more you pay, the larger the pool of possible candidates we'll get, to the point that may be the new term limit, because if we get the pay up high enough, there's going to be a lot more people competing for those jobs. They'll be able to serve in those roles. So that may be the new set of term limits, just more competition, which could be a good thing.
Well, out of respect for Ms. Abrams, since you asked for my opinion, I'll just say very quickly, I'm basically an agnostic when it comes to these issues of salary and term limits, just mainly because I don't think that you can, guarantee quality one way or the other through these kinds of abstract policy changes. I mean, if we raise salaries, hopefully it does increase the competition and provides the dynamic for better legislators. And obviously the whole idea behind term limits was to guarantee, a cleaner government and less corruption. But we've already seen in the 20 years that term limits have been in place in Arkansas that certainly has not prevented corruption from happening. So to make these kind of qualitative predictions, I think, is impossible, but obviously the hope is that you improve the government as much as you can.
Let me ask a follow-up to that, because you talked about, Scott, doing things in the district. Since I started covering state government, we have seen an absolute explosion in the number of interim legislative meetings that are held, many of which seem to me an excuse for legislators to collect per diems, to be real honest with you. If we increase the salaries, do we see the number of various interim meetings go down?
That's something that I have encouraged the Salary Commission to consider to find the proper balance. And in particular, with regard to per diem, this is my understanding, is that sometimes you have a meeting in Little Rock that's an interim meeting in between sessions, and it's of a particular committee. And so the committee members are expected to come, and you can acknowledge that they need to be there because they're a committee member, but also I'm understanding that sometimes members of the legislature who are not a member of that committee have decided that they need to come
Absolutely.
too and draw per diem, and maybe some of that is legitimate, but anyway, I put that out there for the Salary Commission just to contemplate in their recommendation to the legislature. I also put out there the idea that, I'm sensitive to the idea that we ought to have a useful capital cafeteria. And to the extent that the lobbyist not paying for breakfast and lunch has been banned, then the Salary Commission might want to consider, is there a way to facilitate the effective cafeteria by perhaps looking at the total package for legislators on their salary and expenses, and perhaps having some sort of meal plan that the members could rely on to eat breakfast or lunch there, and that might help boost the sales that have declined because the lobbyists are not paying for it anymore. And they could put that in.
And the food is good, as you know. I write a lot about food.
Yeah.
Testify to that.
Yeah, might insist that if the legislature does that for them, they got to keep that food level up there. You know. Yeah. Anyway, so I guess that'd be my reaction on that.
Senator, do you want to add to that? All right. Other questions? And let's get a microphone. Let's go right here.
Regarding the Salary Commission, it seems to be made up of people that are just from Central Arkansas. How much effort was put into getting a representation from the entire state rather than just in Little Rock?
Good question. Who wants to tackle it? Senator?
It was a lot more difficult than I thought and than what everyone thought, trying to find 7 individuals that were going to put the time in. And we approached quite a few people from Northwest Arkansas and couldn't do it. Work conflict, the being able to, it just sounds almost like they were legislators trying to find time away from home and their job to come down to Little Rock, but only just for a few days. And it kind of gives you a little snapshot of what we're up to, you know, up against 2 years, you know, every 2 years. But, you know, and that was the choice I made, and I'm thrilled to be here in this position. But we approached quite a few people from outside Little Rock, and it was extremely difficult to get anybody that wanted to take the time and take the drive and to pay for, you know, their meals. They're banned from meals and gifts, and, you know, they're going to have to pay their own hotel and all that to come down to Little Rock and make those decisions. So it was extremely difficult.
There were only 20 people in the state that were qualified to serve on the commission.
It was tough. I didn't realize how narrow scoped we did it. We approached quite a few people, and like their husband or their wife worked for the state and just automatically disqualified, or their cousin or sister-in-law was a lobbyist, and we're like, whoops, you know, I didn't know you were related to so-and-so, you know. So
I noted the same thing you did when I saw who was appointed, but I also felt like that it was a fairly good cross-section. It was not just, you know, key opinion leaders or elite people, or it seemed to be folks from different walks of life, and I was, you know, happy to see that. I think there was just one person on it, I guess 2 people that I knew. Chuck Banks, a fellow attorney who's here today, I see, who was appointed by the Chief Justice, and then Barbara Graves. The main reason I know her is just bumping into her because of her clothing store and also the city council. Yeah.
Scott was a regular through the years, Barbara.
I shopped there for Randy Zuck's wife.
Shall we leave now? All right, moving right along, as they say. Job of the moderator. One of our most faithful supporters always of the Political Animals Club is Governor Jim Guy Tucker. Governor, thank you for being here. Next question is yours.
Thank you. The pay package and the various issues you've mentioned forced me to go to the issue of retirement packages. The formulas associated with retirement packages have taken into consideration in the past, I think, the very low salaries that existed. And does the Ethics Commission have jurisdiction over that, or is that something that's going to simply have to be reconciled with the pay increase that's done between the legislature and the commission?
I'll just tell you briefly, I don't know much about, you know a lot more about it than I do, Jim Guy, on how the retirement packages are established. But there is nothing in this proposal, issue 3, that addresses that. It doesn't bring it up in any manner, and it certainly doesn't change the manner in which retirement packages would be established. But And in fact, you ought to send a little note over to the Salary Commission, because I didn't put that on my list of things they might look at, and you might bring it to their attention in a way that you could do better than I could.
I don't think it ought to be destructive in any way, but by the same token, when I was Attorney General, my salary was $6,000.
Right. 6,000 a year as Attorney General, if you didn't catch that without a mic. Yeah.
But even the governor's salary was very, very low during those years. So the result was they gave a multiplier to the years you spent in office. So if you spent, yeah, well, I think it's a lot more than that. But you'd have to check it. But it was targeted on the low salaries as well as the short-term limits that existed. So I do suggest that is something that needs attention to be sure it reconciles.
All right. Yeah, I couldn't remember what the salary was. I do know that Governor Faubus only made $10,000 a year and built a very nice house at the end of 12 years as governor. Go figure.
He was frugal.
Bob? Then I'll get over you, John.
Being a lobbyist, I've worked on a lot of bills, and in almost all of them, where a corporation is mentioned, it's defined, a corporation is defined as a person. Are we going to run into a conflict with that definition and all those laws that have been passed if the Supreme Court upholds the contribution limits?
I don't think so. I think just the way, and that this was not what I drafted, it was already in the proposal. I didn't really do much of anything with the contribution limit part, but I think the way it's drafted, it says the type of persons or entities from which a candidate can accept contributions. It goes about it that way. It says here are the only types of donors that can give to the political campaign. So if it's not on the list, then you can't give. And so corporations and labor unions and associations and so are not on the list. And that grew out of the Regnus Populus proposal that Representative Sabin referred to. That's how they chose to draft it. Yeah.
Senator?
I just want to switch gears just for a second, just
Fine.
before we all get out of here. I wanted to make one thing clear is the polling. I want to address the polling that you all heard about. There's a lot of people that were shocked that it passed, but there are some of us that knew it was going to pass, and I want to tell you why. When we worded the bill, and we worked really hard on making sure that the people knew we were trying to go out of our way to make it a better government. When we referred this out, we vetted it, vetted it, vetted it, vetted it. Mr. Trotter, the godfather of ethics, just did a really good job amending the bill. We were confident this was going to pass. I felt really good about it. I contacted a lot of my friends as time was passing by, and I said, I want to get out and go around the state and promote it. And a lot of political insiders, a lot of consultants said, it's going to pass, don't worry about it. You're good, you don't have to worry. Well, one morning I wake up and USA Today just released a poll showing it was going to pass 57% with 15% undecided. That's when the gloves came off with U.S. term limits. I mean, you're not getting the truth, and I'm here to tell you the truth, what happened. USA Today did a poll and was very in-depth, got in the weeds of what the bill did. 57% of the people were going to vote for it, 15% undecided. Oh my God, did the commercials start raining against this bill. After that, it was just, chaos. Legislators that voted for the bill were, well, I'm not really sure I'm for it anymore. Legislators that spoke for it and were back home in their districts were like, yeah, I'm against that. I can't believe those legislators, can't believe they voted that out, embarrassed of how they voted. But U.S. term limits knew it was going to pass, and I knew it was going to pass. But I didn't realize how competitive south of the tunnel it was. If you look at the map I tweeted a few weeks ago, Benton County supported at 59%, Washington County 61%, Carroll County 62%. Everywhere north of the tunnel was 55% and up. And so I felt pretty good, but I didn't realize the atmosphere down here. I tried to convince Warwick for 2 weeks to do a watch party, and he wouldn't agree to it because he and he was like, "Yeah, let's just see how things go," you know. And I was like, "What's going on?" You know. And I'm just glad Channel 7 News stops about where the tunnel is, you know. And so that's, I think, had a lot to do with
You
the
missed
past.
out on some great analysis
Yeah.
on Channel 7, by the
And
way.
the horse, you know, I watched the movie Troy the other day, and all I could think about was issue 3, you know. But this is the people. You know, we've had some critics. You know, the people that voted against it knew exactly what it did. People that voted for it, in my opinion, knew exactly what it did. I've not met someone that voted against it that said, "Hey, you know," or someone that voted for it that said, "Hey, I thought it was doing something else." That hadn't happened. Everybody I knew that, you know, is educated, knows about the bill, knows exactly what it does. The term limit comment I heard earlier is, you know, our conservative neighbors in Texas, if you talk about term limits down there, they think you're a socialist. And we do have very, very, very strict term limits in place. They're called elections. In the last 8 years, there's been over 30 new U.S. senators. I mean, U.S. senators are bulletproof, you know, and there's been over 30 new U.S. senators in the last 8 to 10 years. That's a lot. And in Arkansas, you've seen a lot of incumbents get beat. I wouldn't be in the Senate if I didn't challenge my incumbent, and that was not easy. And I wasn't banking on term limits either. So I just wanted to be clear about the polling, and I would love, I'm just having fun with this, if you don't mind, Warwick, just for a second.
Floor is yours.
I'd like to see Jay Barth and the U of A explain to me why it passed if they explained to me why it would fail. I think that's fair.
All right, good deal. We had time for one more question.
If I could say add one thing on top of that.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott,
Just
real
a
quickly.
factoid. When this proposal was finally passed by the House and Senate to be referred to the voters, only 4 members of the state Senate voted against it, and only 12 in the House voted against it. Just thought I'd let you know.
Last question.
Hi, can I ask y'all in closing to talk about your ideas for the future? There's been some discussion about maybe having electronically searchable campaign finance databases. One, I think, possible clarification that could help is making sure that people don't get accidentally swept up into the definition of lobbyist now that the consequences of being a lobbyist are that much greater. I think there's a lot of people that worry about if they're just in passing talking to their legislator about something that has to do with their livelihood, if they might qualify. This is kind of just, I've talked to Mr. Zook and Representative Saban in the past a little bit about the longer term picture, but I was hoping in closing some folks might have some ideas about what we might ought to try to work for in the future.
Sure, I'll take that first.
Representative Saban? Yeah.
Senator Woods will probably have something to add to this. But first of all, I want to recognize John Adams because he was one of the leaders of the Regnant Populace. Is this working?
You got it?
Check.
There we go.
John, no, it's not working.
You'll stand up here or take that one.
Does this work?
Yep.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
John Adams was one of the leaders of the Regnant Populace Initiative, and I think he deserves a lot of credit as we were trying to recognize David Couch and Paul Spencer earlier. So thank you, John, for your leadership on that issue. But, where I'll start with this is before one of our special sessions back in 2013, October of 13, I actually drafted 14 new ethics proposals to kind of advance further reforms in the state. One of which was very similar to what you mentioned, where we could have an electronic searchable database for all campaign contributions, because I think that's something that the technology exists for and be very easy to implement. We just need to make the effort to do it. I think we also need to strengthen the Ethics Commission by giving them a bigger budget, more staff, allowing them to deal with a lot of these issues that are coming. So those are 2 right off the bat. I know Senator Woods has another one that he was talking about just over the last few days, and if you want to take that, or are you ready to talk about it? We'll wait.
We're gonna wait
fair
on that
enough.
one. Okay.
Suffice it to say that we do have a lot of other reforms that we'd like to bring forward, and I think issue 3 has opened the door to that. And I'll say, just because we indulged Senator Woods for a second, I'd like to ask you to indulge me for a second, just to say I think Arkansas should be proud of passing some of the most progressive ethics reforms in the United States. And as I read the New York Times this morning and all of the complaints on the front page about what's going on in Albany, New York, and the lack of respect for some of the ethics reforms that were suggested by a commission appointed for that express purpose, I think that Arkansas is a leader on this issue, and I think we should continue to be, because I think that in this state and around the country, this is what the citizens of our state want to see happen. I think that there's a lot of disappointment with what's going on with our government. There's questions about whether government really is accountable and transparent, and does it represent the interests of the people. And so I think the more we can do to inspire confidence in government, the better, because we have a lot of very serious issues to address in this country across a host of different issues, and we need to empower our elected officials with the confidence of the citizenry, and you can only do that by underlining its integrity.
All right, join me in thanking our panelists here today.